It has significant risk. I think one of the largest risks is proliferation, not just because it leads to nuclear bombs, that's probably one possibility, but just because of the waste can be used for dirty bombs.
And we know one accident can be devastating. So I would urge caution, a great deal of caution, in exploring the nuclear option.
But if you want to look at the really difficult questions associated with nuclear power, you have to ask a political question, which is, if we think nuclear power is the answer, do we mean for all countries or just for some countries? If the latter, if we don't think all countries should have access to nuclear technologies, only some, then who makes the A list and the B list, and who enforces it? We don't have to go beyond Iran and North Korea right now to see the sorts of problems associated with that.
And the question is, if we are planning and say, oh, we need 10,000 nuclear power plants around the world to support our economy, why then do we not want to have one of them in Iran? So that shows that there's some tensions that we haven't been able to resolve.
For all these reasons, I don't think nuclear is going to be a meaningful option in the future, although I know political leaders talk about it, and the nuclear industry would like to support it, but I think it is wishful thinking or denial on a mass scale to believe that these old Cold War technologies are going to be a solution in the 21st century.
In turn, much more clever to utilize the capital, to utilize expertise, to utilize, if you want, political energy for alternatives which are more readily available, which are cheaper, and which are becoming effective in a much quicker way. And, of course, alternatives which in the end will have much less risks than the nuclear.
The United States has been using corn-based ethanol, which is not particularly good for the environment. It uses so much energy to make a gallon of corn-based ethanol that it actually doesn't save that much. And it becomes viable only with huge subsidies from the U.S. government. So it's economically doesn't make sense.
The amount of energy it takes to make a gallon of ethanol is about the same as the amount of energy that ethanol will produce. If you count everything, if you count all the energy that went into growing the corn, it takes about a gallon of oil to grow a bushel of corn. So you see, it's not as green as it looks. It looks like a green technology, but in fact it's very black. It already, by the time the corn is grown, it's already soaked in fossil fuel. I think so far biofuels have been an unmitigated disaster. Biofuels are one of the most important reasons that food prices have spiked in the last year. Food prices have gone up 40% worldwide, and biofuels are a big part of the reason.
And with this huge U.S. government subsidy, more of that land is being used to feed our automobiles and less to feed people. And that accounts for at least part of the increase in grain price, which is increasing poverty in the third world. The reason it's so upsetting is that, in fact, there is now competition between, you might say, energy to feed people and energy to feed our cars.
What happened was, when President Bush in 2006 announced these new subsidies and mandates for ethanol, the price of corn went way up. It got up to about $7 a bushel. It's normally under $2. And farmers who were growing other things wanted in on the corn deal, and so they started growing more corn and less soy or wheat. And so the price of all grains went up. And suddenly people around the world found that their ability to feed themselves had been compromised by a decision made by the American president in the White House. Now, okay, so biofuels are making people hungry around the world right now.
Brazil, some other countries, even Paraguay, have been successful in producing competitive ethanol based on sugar. And that means that to grow sugar, we may cut down forests. And so the net contribution of sugar, even in countries where it's efficient, may not really be efficient once we take into account the displaced forest to make room for expanded sugar supplies.
As demand for biofuels has escalated, people are cutting down forests in Southeast Asia to plant more biofuel crops. Or that land that's been taken out of food production to make biofuels has to be replaced somewhere. So more marginal lands are brought into agriculture. And the amount of carbon that's released into the environment when you cut down a forest is so much greater than any benefit you might get from the biofuels that cause that to happen.
It's like with investments. If you pay more than what you get back, you're starting to lose out.
Could there be more sustainable biofuels in our future? Possibly. People talk about making biofuels from other things that are not food. I think if you could make biofuels from basically biomass that is being grown on land other than cropland, that maybe, that's something we have to work on. I don't know whether it'll work. We don't have the technology yet. This is called cellulosic ethanol. But we need to try to make that work. Something that you could do with make biofuels from grasses, crop waste, trees, wood chips. All that needs to be explored. But using agricultural land, this precious, limited resource we have in the world to feed people, and to use that to feed cars and trucks is a disaster.
So what we need to begin to do is we need to begin to wean ourselves off the old energies, fossil fuels and uranium, move to the renewable energies.
What are alternative sources of energy? To my mind, the most important sources of energy going forward will be renewables.
The answer can only be regenerative energies.
There will be wind, there will be solar power, there will be some use of biomass as well.
We create it ourselves, it's renewable, we share it across intergrids like we share information on the internet. That's the future.
The potential for solar energy, wind energy have increased greatly in the last few years.
Then we could do most of our driving with electricity. We are facing peak oil. We may already have passed peak oil, but that doesn't mean the end of the world. It just means we have to rethink how we structure the energy economy and how we do it quickly. And we have a number of issues converging. One is peak oil. A second is climate change and the urgency of cutting carbon emissions. And it turns out that the things you do to reduce oil use and the things you do to cut carbon emissions to stabilize climate are usually moving everything in the same direction.
So that's what we have to look at. Are we able to harness energies in an easy way without harming the environment? Because if it has other kind of harming effects, then we're undermining other abilities to live well.
The answer can only be regenerative energies. Energies that are taken from the flow of nature and not from the stocks of nature.
And there won't be just one energy source that we can rely on. So there will be many different ones. There will be wind, there will be solar power, some use of biomass as well.
Now, what are harvesting? What are flows? Flows of energy are those flows which are animated by the sun. It's the wind, it's the solar radiation, it is the growth of plants, it is in other terms also the movement of the sea, the heat which is in the earth itself. Now these are natural flows, which we as humans can tap into, and which we have tapped into up until the birth of the fossil age about 200 years ago.
Each of the sources of renewables presents their own problems.